is an interview with Lanakila Mangauil by Joy Gardner. This was actually done in 2017.
And now, here is your host, Joy Gardner.
So without further ado, here is Lanakila. Here we are in your place now, here in Honoka. And would you tell us a little bit about how you were raised and how you were so steeped in the culture of Hawaii?
But actually, when I was younger, my mother and father actually separated. My mother is Irish Scottish, and she was born in Colorado, and moved here via living in Alaska. And my father is a Hawaiian Filipino, and comes from Kona area. My grandmother, my father's mother, she was a Mangauil, native Hawaiian. My grandfather, my father's side was Filipino. So myself, I'm quite a mixed plate, Hawaiian, Filipino, Irish, Scottish. But growing up in Honokaa, basically when I was younger, most of what I knew of my culture was just kind of like your day-to-day growing up in Hawaii. So it wasn't really deep in culture in any way. And this is in the early '90s. The Hawaiian movement was kind of on a, you could say, on coming down off of the high point that it made in the Hawaiian Renaissance in the '70s. And
before that, there was a whole repression of the culture.
Major repression.
Could you say just a little bit about that?
Just a little bit from the late 1700s up to the mid 1800s. In that short span of 50, 60 years, we lost 90% of our population.
Yeah, it's just, how many people were living just here on the Big Island?
Oh, just about 1 million or so, almost.
And how many are now?
Now, native Hawaiians?
No, just people.
Oh, just people? I think we're only around 60, 70,000.
Yeah.
I think.
So what was the kapu system?
That is kind of our religious structure as well as political structure. There was a blend of the two. Religion and, for our Hawaiian religion and politics were really intertwined. And so the kapu system, people speak of it very shallowly a lot. You hear just people talk about, oh, you were allowed to eat bananas and women were allowed to do this, and very, very shallow cited about what that kapu was. But it really was particular mandates to preserve and protect power, to preserve and protect mana, and to preserve
Mana
and protect
energy.
Spiritual energy. And as well as protecting the mana of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
But our kapu system was strict. It was strict, and there's understandings. All the serious situation that we're facing today. For me, you realize we didn't have those things before. We didn't have these problems. Why? We had our kapu system, and the kapu system kept things in order.
Like, for instance,
Hawaii is a complete disaster. Some people come here, but again, with ignorant eyes, they see beauty. But if you know the history and you know what the environment's supposed to be, you're looking at complete destruction. The rolling hills of pastures was forest 100 years ago. There's no water. There's no water in our rivers anymore. Our fish are depleted. Our oceans are toxic. We have, military bases that are blowing up our natural environment. We have the devastation of our sacred grounds. All of these things, Native Hawaiians are below the lowest of the low of everything in our own homeland. We're the lowest population. We're the highest incarceration. We're the highest for all the worst statistics.
Yeah.
And all these things. And we are the minority in our homeland.
Right.
All these things are a defect for me, a subject of the loss of our kapu systems. And a lot of our kapu, they were social kapu that we had like that helped to maintain political structure. Same as in America, there's laws. So we had our own system that was designed by this environment, by our way of seeing the world. And every society, you need structure and order, or else there's no society. And a lot of these rules were very, very environmental, extremely environmental. And for example, and again, on the shallow mind, people just hear, if you caught a fish in the wrong time of year, the penalty was death. And everybody was like, people, they just think very shallow. Because on the Western perspective, humans dominate everything else in the world. Humans are greater and more important than everything else in the world. That's a foreign perspective. For us, what makes you any better than the fish? So if you are ignorant enough to break the kapu, or if you are just greedy enough that you don't abide by the kapu, you catch his fish at the time when you're not supposed to catch them, and you just don't care.
So would that be like a spawning time?
A lot of times have to do with spawning seasons. So you do not catch his fish during certain times. You catch, there's other fish to catch. But if you are that greedy, that, well, I wanted this, that attitude would, what we used to say, the ikepapalua, the ability to, the foresight of that, of allowing that attitude to live, would spell destruction. And that's what we're living today, where the laws that have set it free for humans to just take. That's what we're living in.
Yes.
So, because in the Western world, everything was put here for us. That's a very backwards thinking.
It's really different.
Yeah. And that's the Western perspective. Everything was created for us.
Yeah.
That is not how we see it. We are part of all creation. And in fact, in our traditions, like we look at our creation stories such as Kumulipo and all these things, we are the youngest. Everything else is put before us. And for us, we see it in that perspective, you respect your elders.
Yeah.
So all these things, the animals, the plants, all the way back to the mountains themselves, the dirt itself, it's our elders. So how do we treat our elder? We need to gather from that world to sustain ourselves. So we need to give. What's the give and take? The couple maintained a lot of that. And for me, understanding that strict discipline of, penalty being death, that was harsh, but it's bad. Again, too, they're not looking about this one act. They're thinking about the whole chain of repercussion that will follow. And I believe our people learned that the hard way. I believe that they might have made a mistake. I have my own hypothesis. We did discover the remains of giant flightless birds on the Hawaiian Islands. After they wiped out that bird, they probably really learned from that and realized, oh my God, we wiped out our resource.
Yeah.
We can never allow that to happen again. And that is why I think there's such strict enforcement when it came to gathering practices in Hawaii, understanding that we are on islands, resources are limited, just as a canoe mentality. We're canoe people.
Yeah.
You only got so much to get you across the ocean, and you better make sure to conserve that.
Right.
And I think they just kind of got, perhaps they made that mistake. They hunted these birds to extinction, and then they learned. And so that's where it's like really beyond the fact of every person. Why would a single person have more rights to existence than these fish, than the birds, than the plants? When that fish that you catch on a season, the reason we had a couple at that time is because it's spawning. I mean, you think about it. These animals and plants, they're giving to the whole cycles of the world every single moment.
Yes.
What do? We take. We are the worst species to be introduced to this planet in the way that we're living today. All of our ancestors around the world had figured out a way to live in the same cycle, in the same rhythm as their homes. That is where everyone is indigenous to this planet. Everyone is native to this planet. And it's our terminology. People look at these terminologies and they don't like these terms, but we're of this planet. However, that does not mean that we can be whoever we want to be wherever we go.
Yeah.
We are subject to the laws and rules of that environment. And then it goes back to the ancient cultures. Our laws and ways of being in our places is set down not just by human, but because of our time living in these places long enough that we know these are the laws of this land.
Yeah.
This is how you need to live in this place so that you do not become a detriment to this environment.
Right.
And it's when we try to travel and we go all over the place and then we try to change the place to fit us. That's when we become the cancer.
Yes.
And so that's where our couple systems and stuff, that they were strict, but they maintained. That's why we were able to live in these islands for thousands of years. And when the first Europeans arrived, they didn't find people surviving on islands. They found them thriving on a thriving paradise.
A lot of people thriving.
Exactly.
Yes.
Lots of people thriving and a whole environment still thriving.
Yeah.
And now you can read all the journals and stuff from early ships coming into and how they wrote of this environment. Luscious jungles, luscious valleys, birds everywhere, every fish just coming out by the tons of the sea. And this is after a couple thousand years of hundreds and thousands and millions of people living here.
Yeah.
So how did we not wipe out the resources? Because we were part of it.
Right.
That is the ticket. It's how do we live as part of the environment and know that if we move and we go someplace else, we have to change. We don't change the place, we change. And that's where we fit in harmony. So that's where our kapu and our spirituality comes in. And so my teachings, where I've learned this, surprisingly, it wasn't so much exactly in my ohana, in my family. My family is very strong Christians. And, besides just like local lifestyle and some things, like my dad was one, he'd go fishing and I know people I grew up with, my local families here, go fish, go dive, go hunt. But it wasn't until I began to, my mom and father separated when I was very young. But my mom, so I living with my mom, Irish, Scottish, from Colorado. I remember her telling me one day that she was going to send me to a camp, me and my sister, to this summer camp in the valley. She remember her saying to me, I can't teach you about your Hawaiian. So she knew that she wanted us to learn our culture, which we are by blood, and that we're living in Hawaii. So I got to attend these summer camps in Maipio. It started in Maipio, and they were called Pupuluku Mohana. And the Pupuluku Mohana summer camps when I was on, they were like a month long. A whole month we lived in the valley. And there was practitioners, and there was many practitioners was actually via these camps. Remember Auntie Kukakalau sharing, a lot of us in these camps are all young Hawaiian kids. And here we are in our valley, and we are thriving. We are eating from the land. We're working. We're learning our chants, our stuff. We're reading these texts and everything. But these are the Hawaiian kids. These are the ones you go into the Western school. We're all ADHD. We're all, below learning, whatever. I was borderline special ed. We get all these brands and everything on us in that Western world. And I remember Auntie Cruz's very words. She said, why then, if we see where our kids do well, why then would we want to send them back to the belly of the beast? And that has always stuck with me. And from that, her and Uncle Ale and other kumus got together and they formed the very first Hawaiian Academy, which was a school within a school right here at Konaka High School. And then in the year 2000, from that academy, they branched out and became the very first Native Hawaiian public charter school. I was already in 9th grade when that school opened. So I was able to transfer there, and my whole high school was in Aina.
Could you talk a little bit about, most Westerners think of hula as just a dance.
Right.
And could you talk about the spiritual aspect?
Well, it is our form of dance. It is an art, and it has many, many different layers and levels, and it's changed in time. To quote the kumu of my kumu, hearing Auntie Puakanahele, a great analogy of what hula is. Hula is a reflection of life. It is a reflection. And so the ancient dances that we do are reflecting that time and that space. And that's the sounds that you hear, the motion that you see, dating back, from those ancient days are meant to be done in those styles to preserve. It is to give us the feeling and the emotion and see what took place at those times. His hula is our textbook. And so that's why I am an animate hula dancer, because it's our history. A lot of our hula dancers and people today to see who are technically Hawaiian historians and a lot of those cultural resources, many of them are hula people. Because to be a hula dancer, a true hula dancer, you are a historian.
And the chanting too.
The chants, because actually the foundation of everything is chanting. It's in the chants. That is our textbook. That's our encyclopedias. Everything that's been, we still recite these chants that were composed hundreds and some thousands of years ago.
Long before the written word.
Long before the written word. And written word wasn't even introduced to Hawaii till the early 1800s. So other than that, all this hundreds and thousands of years of history and knowledge passed down oral tradition, all through all these chants. And then hula is a enhancement of the chant. You cannot have hula without chant. So people sometimes, I've seen people take out hula and out in other places and just doing motions. That's not hula. That's a bastardization of it. It all has to come from the chant.
Let me kind of shift the topic because I want to get back to the mountain and the places in nature that are sacred and how all that ties in with the culture. And can you talk about that?
Well, the foundation of everything Hawaii is Aina. It is our land. It's our light. It's the waters. No land, no culture. There is no separation of the two. You cannot just it's not a complete, just only in your spirit or only in your mind thing that you can just take with you. It is tethered to this place. It is tethered to this environment. You lose the land, it dies. And that's when we just start wearing fake legs and everything again. It's not real. Our spirituality is completely intertwined with Aina, because that is what feeds us. That's what sustains us, not economy, not just spirit energy. It is the land. It is the food that you got to go into your mouth. It's the water that comes into your body. That is what feeds you. There is spiritual energy in it.
Yeah.
But you can't just suffer spirit out of it. You need that.
Yeah.
That's what sustains. And in order for that to flow correctly, we need the land healthy. So when it comes to sacred spaces, that word gets used a lot. And without understanding, like what we're facing today, the Western world, especially the very dominating developmental false idea of progress, of just develop, construct. That whole culture is launched quite a strong campaign against anything that is claimed to be sacred. Because whenever we use the term sacred, they're just like, oh God, they're just making it up. But it's because it's a very shallow understanding coming from a Western perspective what sacred means. For us, sacred, it actually is not that great of a word for us because, again, it's in English and it doesn't really, what does that mean? We should be able then, what if I come up and say, why is it sacred? You're going to have an answer. So, for an example, Mauna Kea. So Mauna Kea for us, it is our piko. It is a piko, and being like it's a
so before you go
point.
there, just a moment. Not everybody knows what Mauna Kea is. Not everybody knows about the whole situation that happened up there. So Mauna Kea is the highest mountain in the world, is it not? If you go from sea level all the way up.
Yeah, it's our most highest and sacred mountain. From the seafloor to the summit, it's over 30,000 feet. And in some cases, considered one of the tallest mountains, or second tallest mountain in our solar system. So the second is by Olympus Mons.
By what?
Olympus Mons is the mountain on Mars.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it is our highest point. It's the highest point of all of Oceania and all of the Pacific. And for us, it is the home of some of our highest gods. But understanding what that is. When we talk about gods, again, they're not just out there. They are real. There's no question of their existence because we see them, we touch them, we use them, they're around us because they are our environment. God is the environment. It's not their God is a humanoid spirit out here that conducts or controls the element. The God is the element is the God. That's a big one too, where when we're trying to teach and share about these things, it gets put into a Western filter, and then there's a separation.
Yeah,
there's the spirit, and then there's the element. It's like no, it's the same.
Yeah,
it's the same.
Yeah.
So so Mauna Kea and what's been happening in Mauna Kea. From the 60s, Mauna Kea has been invaded and being desecrated by construction of telescopes on the summit. Traditionally, in our practice, Mauna Kea, the traditional practice of Mauna Kea is stay out.
Yeah, could you explain that? I think that's really, really hard for Westerners to understand.
Yeah, and that's that mantra that it's very difficult for people to get. Sacred doesn't mean you have to use it. Sacred is that it in itself is important and gives life to us. It's a part of what sustains life. That's what makes it sacred. It's part of what sustains life. And beyond us, that's the other thing that's very difficult because Westernization is very central to self.
Yeah.
It's all about self,
Yeah.
self-serving, self-everything, humans first,
Yeah.
self first. No, so not our way.
Okay.
So we have to think that it is critical to giving life to everything. Yeah? Get rid of humans, it still gives life to everything else, including us, and everything that we need is sustained by these places. So Mauna Kea, again, in our tradition, was pretty much to be left alone. We did not intrude into that space.
So you didn't go up on the mountain, or people didn't go up on the mountain.
No. There was particular reasons. You had to have very particular reasons, and it's predominantly high priests and high chiefs would make that journey to the mountain for very specific reasons. Particular families who had relations to the mountain, and for particular practices, some would ascend to the mountain. The most common that you would probably hear about is the laying of the piko, or the umbilical of the babies. Kind of a general practice of Hawaiian people is to take the umbilical and we put it onto the earth someplace. And we bury it. And a lot of families have a special spot that their families always take in. And the idea of that is that, as this piko or the umbilical connected you to your mother in the womb, when you bury it in the earth, now you're connected to the ultimate mother. And no matter where you go, you're tethered to a place. And so for many families, especially families from the Hamakua and Waimea areas, Mauna Kea was that sacred place, Lake Waiau area.
Wow. So would they take their own umbilical cord up there, or would they give it to one of the families that are sacred, would relate to the mountain?
No, it's pretty much a family practice. So
Okay.
a part of somebody in the ohana take the umbilical of a baby to the mountain. And of course, every family had their own practices and stuff too, so it's very different as you go along. And that's still today. A lot of families still practice that today. So that was one of the general functions. But other than that, la'au lapa'au maybe too, and some medicines, particularly not on the high summits. I've heard a couple stories here and there where it was like for sacred medicine they gathered the snow, or some stories gathering some water from Lake Waiau for a ceremony or something. So there was very specific reasons by how we entered the place. There's a mo'olelo that I abide by that is our context and instructions of how we are to live and how we are to enter these places. And first and foremost, is if you even deserve to enter these places. So the road, in this instance that was on Mauna Kea today, that was carved back in the 60s to make it accessible, like Jeep and everything, and to start construction of a very first telescope on the mountain, which was the Mokukea telescope, which was the big one that was, way back in the 60s, so you can consider where the Hawaiian community was. We were very impressed people. It was before the Hawaiian Renaissance and everything, so you didn't hear too much back then. And this telescope was small. It's like as big as this room right here. It's not big. And it was a Jeep trail kind of carved onto the mountain. And it was to be the one telescope on the mountain. Well, Western ways, just open up the doors, and all they want to do is take more. So currently today, there's now 13 giant telescopes on the mountain now. They've carved a huge, massive asphalt double-lane road all the way up the mountain. They've dug in huge, massive trenches, and they have massive electric lines going up the mountain. And they have these monstrosities on the summit. The highest point of all of Oceania now is not the summit of a mountain. It's the top of a metal building. That's the highest point of our Oceania today. And those highest sacred hills every one of them has a name. And they were left, the top of them chopped off, if not dynamited, to build these things. And everyone was, this will be the last one. This will be the last one. 13 telescopes later, they're trying to put a 14th that is bigger than all the rest of them combined. A 30-meter telescope with the base of this, the area they want to clear over 8 square acres of land, bulldoze and flatten on this sacred, but also very fragile ecosystem in an alpine desert. Mauna Kea is very important. It was the first mountain child born to Wakea, the Sky Father, and Papahana, the Earth Mother, who in our cosmology is the parent. Wakea is the father of the Hawaiian race, and is Wakea and Ho'okalani, the Star Mother, who gives birth to the first Kanaka, the first human, and we descend from the stars to live here at Papahana with the grandmother. Now, it's really important to understand that in this cosmology story, it's intertwined with migrations and other things too, and how it's connected. So it's not just a spiritual story or a deity story. It's connected historically as well too. But the mountain was said to be born of Wakea and Papahana, the Earth Mother and Sky Father. So it is a mountain, an old name, Mauna Awake, Mauna Kea, Mauna Awake, the mountain of Wakea. And so in the genealogy was born first, and then later came human. So we are genealogically connected to this mountain, as the mountain we see as an older sibling, and has that responsibility as an older sibling to care for the younger. We are the young, and so we respect and we honor the mountain. But in our stories too, that was the birth of the mountain, and later it is Kane. Kane for us is the god of light, and we recognize Kane. Kane is Kane Ho'olan, the sun, as well as Kane Tawaiola, the fresh water is Kane. Primarily, it's the heat, because it's the heat that moves water. It is the heat that transforms kai into salt water to fresh water by millions of gallons at a time, transporting millions of gallons of water above our heads in clouds and transporting it over the land so that we feed everything. And that's why it is Kane. So they say when Kane came to these lands and saw the mountain, he smiled upon this mountain and said that this is where he would bear his sacred daughters. So it is upon Mauna Awakea he had his 4 sacred daughters, Lilinoi, Waiau, Kahuko Kane, and the youngest but the most divine, Koriahu. And each of these deities, we know them by their kinolai, by their physical manifestation. Lilinoi is the mists of the mountain. Waiau is the lake Waiau. Kahuko Kane are the springs and the thunderstorms of the mountain. And Koriahu is the snow. And they all say that the 3 older sisters, they love and they care for Koriahu. They all care for her. But what do they all have? What do they all have in common? In their kinolau, they're all water. They're all water beings. And in understanding this is where a lot of people, where I've been trying to break that mold, because in our fight to protect Mauna Kea from further development, we've been labeled as being anti-science because we're just, it has nothing to do with the science. We have nothing against astronomy. It's about digging and gouging out all this land that's supposed to be left alone. It's conservation. The mountain's conservation. So part of the rules of the conservation is you only can do things in the conservation zone that's related to the conservation. Astronomy just doesn't fit the bill. It has nothing to do with conserving the mountain. So anyway, but again, astronomy is but only one science. But how are we anti-science when we're pro earth science? The geology, the geography.
You were great at astronomers with using the stars.
Yeah. So and then we didn't need to bulldoze the ground to do it either. We just looked and we know how to use them. And that's a difference in our sciences as well too. But so as I explain, a lot of our these mo'olelo, these stories, and our spiritual design, it's very important. I always teach you this is also our scientific understanding. That's what is science. Science is observation of nature. This is how we observe nature, but a different perspective again too, where we don't just see these things as separate from us and just these elements that we're just observing. They are deities to us because we understand these systems and we know that they give us life. That's what makes them a god to us, an akua, as we say. Because them doing that thing over there is what's giving us life. So don't mess it up. That's our thing. Don't mess up those things that sustain life. So the summit of the mountain, they argue that there's no water up there. That it's like in our stories, that's where all the gods of water live. You know, Poliahu, the snow is draped over that mountain. Even when I was younger, almost all year round, there used to be snow. It used to be snow capped for a long time. It used to come way down. I still remember playing in the snow by the visitor center. That's 9,000 foot. And I remember going with my sister them on this side and hunting up Moka, and the snow is down in the ohia trees. And that was common before. Now we're facing global warming and stuff too, so it's definitely gone up. Lake Waiau is held up on that mountain, but where else do we have lakes? There's hardly any lakes in Hawaii because lava is very porous. So how is the lake being held up on the summit? Permafrost. The mountain, within the mountain, it's ice. And there are ice capes around the mountain too. You go in, it's all solid ice. So that's what's holding. The mountain is, as we see it, where Kane has his daughters, all these primary gods of this main sources of water. That's what makes one of the biggest things that make this mountain so sacred. We see it as it is the crown of the watershed. It's the crown of the aquifers. And whatever you do above is going to affect. And they say it's not going to do that. It's not going to. We're not affecting the aquifer. The aquifer is down there. But it's like you have Lake Waiau sitting up at about 12,000 foot elevation. That means there's ice there. That means there's ice all around here. And if your tank under the ground cracks or leaks, which there's been many leaks, that goes into our water. And maybe we might not be drinking that water for a while, but down the line, our descendants will. But so that's just that just disregard. Unless it's going to slap them like immediately. If it's going to affect later on, like, I don't care, I'll be dead. Or that's just lack of care. But these areas, they're very sacred to us because we know that they are critical to giving life to everything around. And not just us. That's what's so different too. We're not just thinking about humans. We're thinking about everything. And because we know everything else was created before us. Everything else is part of the foundations of life that sustain life. We can't fathom that. We think we're so great, smart, and technologically advanced, but we're dumb. We're dumb to think that we can be like the gods, that we can set up all these things that are going to sustain life all around. But we're all thinking about ourselves, which is not, was it our point? And so, with our stand with the mountain, to protect that, to protect these things, in the stories, Kane deems the mountain kapu, that no mortal was to go on that mountain because in our story, his daughters were too beautiful. No mortal was allowed to look up. So it was made kapu. And so these 4 daughters lived there, but they also had attendants. Li Hao was a personal attendant, the lady in waiting to Korea. And she was the frost. And then they were given guardians. Mo'oinanea is a great dragon. And she is known as the matriarch of all the mo'os of Hawaii. And she guards Koreahu. And then there's Kipu'upu, the hailstorm, Kuauli, the blizzards, the black biting rain. So we see all these images. They're real to us. Well, they're real. We see blizzards a lot. And so that's Kuauli. And their thing was they defended the mountain. They had to protect Koreahu. And so the story would be that every time someone went up the mountain, they would descend and they would turn them away from the mountain. But there's a story about one man, Ukahau, who was a chief that came, led by a dream to meet the maiden Koreahu. And in the story, he traverses the mountain. He makes his way, he climbs the mountain. As he starts to reach toward the summit, the Kiai, the guardians, descend and they tell him, "You are not allowed here in Guatemala." Then graciously he leaves. But the next morning as the sun rose, his heart content looking at the mountain. The beauty of the mountain, he said, that is to behold the beauty of the woman. I must see her. And he has to climb the mountain again. And as he makes it all the way toward the summit, they descend. Who told you you cannot be here? You must leave. And he descends. Every morning, every day, he climbs that mountain. They turn him away. And it goes on and on and on. At the point they say that some of the sisters are now talking to Koreahu. Wait, there's this man. He keeps coming. He comes and comes. Oh, we keep telling him, he keeps coming. And so Poliahu, she observed him up high, and she starts to watch this every day, and her heart begins to ache. The thought of, look at this man, such devotion. Why can I be with him? Why is it I am destined to be alone? Why can I be with him? Yes, I am. And so they say that Mo'inanea, it is the dragon guardian, who feels for her and decides to take the journey to go and speak with her father, to speak to God. And of course, she asked him, would you allow them to be? And he goes, nope. He's daddy. You're not. No way. It's my baby girl. And so she says, just watch them. So they say as Kane Okala, as the son makes his journey every day, he watched this. And then sometime he saw the pain and the loneliness in his daughter's eyes, and it touched his heart. And his heart softened. And so he sent word to the Kiai to open the paths, open the pathways. And the next day when Kukaula ascended the mountain again, he was shocked to be greeted. And so the guardians, they escorted him to Pu'upoliahu, which is one of the hills on the summit. And the mist, the lilinoi, was all covering. And as he approached the summit of this Pu'u, the curtain opened, the mist opened, and there was Poliahu, standing in such, just her beauty just shimmered. And they said that she wears the kapahaukia, the white snow mantle. Her pa'u was all the snow of the mountain. He was just in such awe of her divine beauty. He dropped to the ground, prostrated himself to the earth, and thought, what could I possibly give to such a woman of divine beauty? And so he offers his highest symbol of royalty, his feathered cloak, his red feathered cape, and the ahu'ula. And so he offers this to her, and when she accepts, he stands and to wrap it around his shoulders. When he wrapped the red ahu'ula around her, it was her first embrace ever by a man. And they say the whole mountain began to shine with reds and pinks and oranges like his ahu'ula. And they held each other just for this short time. And then the guardians came and said, Kukahu'ula, you have been granted this time with Poliahu, but now you must leave. And they said, why do I must leave? They said, Kami has granted you time with his daughter, but you may visit her again, but you may only visit her when he is close to the earth. In other words, when the sun is rising and when the sun sets. Because daddy is watching. and it's like, I'm going to defile my daughter. You come, you visit, but I'm watching. I love our stories. It's so practical. So we still see that in the morning and in the evenings when we see those hues, those red colors on the mountain. That's the hope. But as we makavalu, or we interpret that story in its kauna, its deeper meanings. For me, that is, and for a lot of us, this is a mo'olelo that sets the foundation of the protocol on how you approach the mountain. So prior to this, it was just people know you don't go on the mountain. So with this, the idea of the image of that he had to back and forth, was never allowed. For us, that's a matter of questioning yourself. Is your journey, is your desire to go to the mountain really worth it? Are you truly dedicated to this? If it's just like, I got a mountain. It's not good enough. So, are you dedicated to what you are going there for? So that's first one. Like, is it really worthy? He had to prove his worth over and over and over. And then, how, even when he was granted access, how did he enter? Very humble. Very, very soft he walked upon the land. And the idea, he's a chief. The image that he is a chief and he will lay flat onto that earth shows that level of respect. That's how we walk. If we go up there, that's how we walk. We are to walk in that level of high respect. And then you don't give offering. What can you offer? Not just anything. What did he offer? His highest symbol of royalty. So you don't just take any kind of thing up there. If you even have to take anything, you just bring, it has to be like the bestest.
Uh-huh.
But what does that mean? What is that? That's a metaphor for, again, to you only take your best up there. You are your humblest self. And how long do you stay up there? Not long.
No.
You get up there, do what you have to do, and get out.
Yeah.
Because the whole principle, why didn't Kane let him stay there? Most likely you let two lovebirds stay in the same room together too long, they're going to get hanky-panky. And no, in the interpreting the story for Kane, that would defile his daughter.
Mm.
That's what humans have done now.
Mm.
By lingering too long on that mountain, they have defiled they defiled the sun.
Mm.
They have bulldozed the earth. They have exploded dynamite in that mountain. There are chemicals. There's asphalt and tar all over. There's trash on that mountain. Why? Because we want to be there for long periods of time. That's why we don't go up those places. Because wherever humans, if we want to be in a place, we always end up making a mess. Humans are trashy creatures. Everywhere we go, in order for us to be there, we end up doing all these things, changing the place, especially nowadays because we're so we can't live without everything. So all this, that is what those couples, those stories was trying to prevent.
That was beautiful. You're such a great storyteller.
This virtual event is brought to you by Joy Gardner, the RMA Mystery School, and the Vibrational Energy Coach Certification Program.